And now we're going to move on to why we're all here. Ms. Freed strongly believes in the relational power of therapy. Though she conceptualizes a client's situation from a psychodynamic perspective and favors talk therapy, her treatment techniques stem from evidence-based practices. In addition to premarital counseling, Ms. Freed specializes in issues related to high school, college, and young adult life. Ms. Freed's interests and experience in counselor training, clinical education and supervision, and professional identity development have led her to serve as a clinical supervisor of practicum students in the counseling program for the past 3 years. She also has a strong interest in group dynamics and has held various positions on the consulting staff of the Northwestern Tavistock Group Relations Conference for approximately 20 years. And with that, Amy, I will pass it off to you, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to present today, and also nervous because I've never done this before, but it's so far so good. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming and being here with me. We only have an hour for me to tell you how to teach people how to treat you, which isn't very long. So if there are any questions at the end or in the future, please feel free to contact me. Cassie told you a little bit about who I am. I received my degree from the University of Illinois in psychology, and then I received my master's degree in counseling psychology from Northwestern in 1997. So I am going to actually switch slides so you can see the plan for today. First, I will continue to tell you a little bit of who I am, why I chose this topic, the definition of the concept of system in the mind, which is going to be a big part of this conversation, and how it originated in terms of group dynamics, how we can apply it to individual dynamics and relationships, and also how our system of the mind plays a role in how we let people treat us and how we teach them how to treat us. So again, I kind of jumped the gun a little and told you who I was before I showed you this slide, but I did receive my master's degree in counseling psychology from here in 1997. And I had noticed that in the work that I was doing, in the supervising and the teaching and the group dynamics work, that I was starting to notice patterns in my clients, mostly individuals, adults and adolescents, some couples. And the pattern I saw was how often individuals would misinterpret situations. So they would either misinterpret what was being said to them, or they would misinterpret other people's behaviors. And then because they misinterpreted it, it caused them to react and respond and behave in ways that didn't seem to quite match what the actual situation was. And so when that happens, it obviously affects their relationship. So once I was aware of this theme, I began to notice it as a pattern in all of my clients. So it didn't matter age, gender, race, socioeconomic status. It really was very prominent in everyone that I was working with, especially in couples, because I would see the reaction of one partner to the other. And as I was sitting in the room, I heard what the one partner was saying, but the other partner was interpreting it entirely differently than I was hearing it. So what I decided to do was try to make sense of why that was happening and why it was happening in so many different arenas. And the way that I found to make sense out of it was to apply a group dynamics concept to an individual process. And as I mentioned, I have a role in the Tavistock conference here at Northwestern University in group dynamics. And it's actually a course that our students are required to take. And although it is often on a larger scale, the idea that you can apply it to the individual world was really intriguing to me. So the main concept that I first decided was going to be applicable was something called system in the mind. And this concept was created by a wonderful man named Stan Deloche, who I do know personally, and he is quite a brilliant person. And originally, he developed this concept in the Tavistock model, which is a more experiential type of conference, meaning that it was less didactic, and it was an opportunity for individuals to experience what was happening for them in the here and now. So that it wasn't just someone talking to them, but it was an opportunity for them to, in the moment, figure out how they were responding to leadership and authority. And the here and now experience is a combination of both the rational and the conscious elements of what's happening right now in the room, and also the irrational and largely unconscious elements of what happens in the room. So the idea allowed for what feelings and thoughts, either the perceived feelings and thoughts or the real feelings or thoughts, existed, and how they influenced the people's reactions. What was fascinating to me over time, because as Cassie said, I've done this conference for a long time, was the idea that students or members in general were having such different reactions to leadership and authority. We would get everything from authority was mean to me, they dismissed me, to individuals thinking authority was the end-all be-all and they really had all the answers. But the leadership was doing the exact same thing for both groups. So it was fascinating to me that these different groups of people were interpreting what the leadership was doing in such different ways. And so I started to think about that in terms of the individual work that I do, and thought that it was, quite applicable. So the way that I have now begun to think about this concept of system in the mind. So again, system in the mind was this concept that Stan Deloche came up with to talk about how individuals react to leadership and authority in the here and now, what is happening in the moment. And so what I thought of it as is a filter, basically. And this filter is created by our past relationships and our past experiences. And once we have created this filter, all the current information gets filtered through our past experiences and relationships. And then we respond, we feel, and react as a result of how this information comes through our filter or system of the mind. And because these filters are very individual and often not really conscious, they don't always represent what is happening in the real world. Like in the real world right now, I'm getting something from my computer telling me it wants to reboot, which I don't want it to do. So this is the example of why two people who experience the exact same event may have two very, very different interpretations of it. You know that saying, there are three sides to every story, his, hers, and the truth. And I'm pretty sure that this idea of a filter or system in the mind plays a very large role in that. So it's important to think about what it would be like, what kind of filter you would have if your experience was a certain way. If you grew up and had relationships and situations where you felt incredibly supported and you could do no wrong, you might translate everything that happens to you within that filter. So you might feel that everyone is supporting you, maybe above and beyond how much they're really supporting you, because that is how you know how to filter this information. If you had relationships with people who abused or neglected you, you would likely have low self-esteem. The information would be filtered in a way that caused you to feel very negatively about yourself and how you feel about the world. If your experiences are confidence boosting or your experiences are confidence depleting, all of that has a very large impact on what your filter is going to look like. I thought I might give you a few examples of clients that I have worked with over the years. And so I received my master's degree in '97. So I've been doing this work for a pretty long time. It does make me feel very old. And I actually picked examples based on different places that I've worked. So I have worked at a community mental health center where the clients were of low SES and all different races and backgrounds. I currently work at the Family Institute where I have that as well, but I also have people of more means who come to see me at the Family Institute. So it really demonstrates how this idea is universal. So one client that I have is a housewife, and she lives in the area, and she has been married to a man for about 22 years or so. And the conflict that she is experiencing is that he will come home from work and criticize a lot of what she has done during the day. So, the house is a mess, the dinner isn't good, or it's not what he wanted, or, something's happening with their child. So, my client, day after day, takes in this information and filters it in a way, and because of her low self-esteem that she established a long time ago, she believes the things that he is saying to her and really takes it to heart and responds in a way that shows that she really does have this low self-esteem. So we've talked about ideas of, does she tell him that it upsets her, that it hurts her feelings? And she will say to me, no. I have found that if I just leave it alone, if I don't pursue it, if I don't say anything about it, then it'll just go away. I apologize. The computer here wants to reboot, and I don't want it to, so I'm going to tell it to wait an hour, and I'm really hoping it will wait an hour. She doesn't want, so going back to the example, she doesn't want to talk about it with him. She doesn't want to raise how she feels because she is concerned that he will become more angry and more upset. So in this way, she has basically taught him how he can treat her because she hears what he's saying. And instead of taking a step back and saying, you know what, I did all this for you today. I'm keeping, my house together. I am working a part-time job. I'm keeping our children together. She is feeling that low self-esteem and feeling that he's right, that she isn't correctly. And so by not saying anything, nothing changes, and it just continued on. Another example that I have was when I worked at a community mental health center, and I had a client who grew up in the foster care system. She is African American and comes from a lower SES, really had no support system and no family. And I'd worked with her for a long time, and we had a really good relationship. And at one point, she became suicidal, and I had to hospitalize her. And unfortunately, she had a non-salaried job. So if she took time off, she wasn't going to get paid, which then affected her rent and her food and her utilities and all of that. So I had applied for emergency funds for her through an agency. And on the day that these funds were supposed to come through, they didn't. Something happened bureaucratically, and she did not have the money she needed to pay her rent. And the way she took in that information from me was really personal, and felt that it was my fault and my responsibility that she hadn't gotten the money. And even though we had had such a good relationship and all evidence pointed to the idea that I was trying to help her and I was trying to keep her stable, the filter that she had was I was just part of the bigger system who had let her down over the years and really failed her. And so for a while, we really had to work through our relationship in order for her to come back to the idea that, that I had very little control over what happened and that I was working my hardest to try and help her and keep her stable. Finally, a last example is actually an example of one of my students whose client, her father died when she was really young. And I think she was around 10 or so, 10 to 14. And she ended up marrying a man who really liked to be in charge, liked to be in control. He's the one that made the decisions. She constantly doubted herself. And really struggled with being her own person and verbalizing what it was that she needed, because he was always making the decisions about the relationship. And at one point, he decided that he wanted to have an open marriage. And for this client, she really, personally, internally, she felt like it just wasn't what she wanted. It wasn't a good idea. She didn't want to have this kind of relationship. But because she doubted herself so much, she started to think, well, maybe he's right. Maybe that is what we should be doing. Maybe that would make our marriage better. And she really struggled with the idea that she had a voice in making a decision and she could teach him how to treat her. But because of her filter with, feeling like she needed someone else to make the decisions for her, that no one had built her confidence enough for her to be able to say how she felt, she really struggled with saying yes to this idea. She ended up not saying yes to the idea, but there was some counseling that was required in order to get her to see her role in the relationship. Okay, now I am trying to, honestly, technology is not my friend. I am trying to switch okay, all right, good, yay. So going to the slide that you see, I really like the idea that Bolus came up with, the idea of an unknown thought. So the unknown thought is basically what your filter is doing to the information that you're processing. So things are affecting you from your inner world, but they're not brought to your full consciousness. So you have to wonder how many times you're having these conversations in your head. You are telling yourself, processing this information at an unconscious level, and that is causing you to react, to feel, to behave in ways that don't necessarily match what's going on, because your whole internal world is lighting up and going crazy. So system in the mind was the group dynamics idea. Another way to understand this dynamic, and it's exactly the same, is the idea of primary and secondary behaviors and thoughts. And this also comes from group dynamics, the idea that, why does this computer hate me? Okay, the idea that primary thoughts are about what is tangible, what is real. So what is actually happening in the moment? Versus, and I would say if you had to break that up percentage-wise, primary thoughts are about maybe 15 to 20% of what's actually going on in a room, leaving the rest to be all these secondary thoughts. It's your inner speech. It's the conversations that you're having with yourself. It's the influences that your past relationships have had. It's the influences that your past guardians and friends and family and experiences have had. That is what is filling up the room when you are having an interaction with somebody else. I thought it might be helpful to give you a couple of examples of primary and secondary thoughts. And this actually comes from the book Walking on Eggshells by Mason and Krieger. And I just thought that these were really good at exemplifying what I am talking about. So in terms of primary issues, you think about what is actually said. So if someone says, actually, I think I'm ahead of myself here. Please hold. No, I'm not. Look at that. Okay. So what is actually said is, I have to work late. This project is taking longer than I anticipated. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to cancel our plans. So that is actually what is said in the moment between two people. Another person hears or filters this end result. I don't want to go out with you. This is what they think that the other person is saying. I don't want to go out with you this evening because I am dreading spending time with you. Or my work is more important to me than you are. So therefore, I would rather be doing my work than spending time with you. So the person's reaction is then, well, I think we should break up. This isn't working. Because the filter is telling this person, you don't want to go out with me because your work is more important, or you don't love me enough or care about me enough. And then the behavior reflects the information going through that filter. Another example, I'm going to apply for the promotion at work too. I think it'll be a good fit for me. What might be heard through the filter is, I have such a better chance at this promotion than you do because I am much more qualified. So then what is done? The person withdraws their application for the promotion. When in fact, that wasn't what was said originally. What was said was the individual thinks that they too would be a good fit, and now it's a competition, but it doesn't mean that you are less than and not worth the promotion. So hopefully that is a good way to understand what I'm talking about in terms of what happens when you have this filter and the difference between primary and secondary issues. So now I'm going to try my best to switch the slide. Yay. Oh, no, go back. Okay. And tie it all together for you. So I just thought this quote was really exactly what we're trying to talk about. So it says, every day we teach people how to treat us by showing them what we will and won't accept, what we refuse to confront, and what we let slide. Should say we. We may believe that we can make the other person's troublesome behavior disappear by not making a fuss. But the message we send is, it worked, do it again. So again, the example I gave you of the housewife who would not stand up to her husband, who would not say, if you don't like how I'm doing the laundry, you can do the laundry yourself. She, by not challenging him, by allowing him to continue to treat her that way, he continued and went on until she just couldn't handle it anymore. It took some counseling and talking to be able for her to see that her filter was basically translating the information he was giving her as, you are awful, you are terrible, you are bad at this. And that is pretty much how she felt her whole life. So that is how she took in the information and accepted it. Our filters are what keep us from teaching others how to treat us, right? So again, that example that I just gave you, this client felt like she deserved it. She deserved to be treated the way that she was being treated. And she didn't say anything because it wasn't worth upsetting the husband, because that would make it worse. Because that would make it worse. For the client who went through the foster system, she processed the fact that the things didn't come. She processed the idea that the money didn't come and help her as, this is how the world is. This is how the world has been to me ever since I was young, and everyone is a part of that. And even if I think there's someone out there who's going to change it for me, they don't. the idea that you think that the other person is always right, so you don't want to say anything. So you allow them to continue to make decisions or say things to you or do things that really aren't okay with you, but you're so afraid of upsetting the other person or losing them that you don't do anything about it. And so what I'd like you to be able to take away from this webinar is the idea that you have more control in your relationships than you think you do. Eleanor Roosevelt actually in 1940 said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." And I really like that quote because it beautifully illustrates what I'm talking
that momentary challenge, but we're going to get Amy back in here in just a second.
Okay. Hi. Sorry about that. Honestly, I think there are a few of my past students who are watching this, and I'm sure, and maybe some of my current ones, and they know, I think technology just does not like me, which is hilarious because my husband is in the technology field, but I always seem to have some issues with technology. Anyway, back to this. So that's my secondary stuff going on. Technology should be my friend. My husband supports you. Please support me too. Okay. Back to what we were talking about. You have more control in the relationships than you think you do. You have control over your actions, your reactions, the ways in which you translate data, and what you will and won't tolerate from others. All right, so to kind of tie this all together, I am going to talk about what you can do when you have this filter and you're aware of this filter, how you can use it in order to teach others how to treat you. So the first thing you want to do is identify and understand your filter. How are you interpreting what is being said to you? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling as it's being said to you? That means you have to be in the moment. You have to be mindful, and mindfulness is a huge concept in terms of what's evidence-based practice and what's going on out there. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that. A lot of self-help books about mindfulness, and really it's about being present and checking in with yourself to see what you are actually feeling in the moment. Do you notice any patterns in how you respond to things? A lot of times when we feel threatened or uncomfortable, we regress to a former time and use patterns that had helped us before. So whether that's withdrawing or whether that's blowing up and getting angry, we feel comfortable in our defense mechanisms that have helped us in the past. And a lot of times those come up and they're not conscious. You're not thinking that that's how you're responding, but really it is reminiscent of how you used to respond in those situations. You also want to understand what is being said, and does it remind you of your past? Does it remind you of a guardian, or does it remind you of a past experience that you had? Currently, I have a client who is divorced from his wife, and he is currently in a new relationship, and it's become apparent that he avoids any kind of expression from his partner about how she's feeling or what is going on for her, because because he is afraid that it's going to be a criticism, and his ex-wife was very critical of him. So it doesn't really even matter how his partner says it, when she says it, what she's talking about. He is translating it as, she is criticizing me and I'm doing everything wrong and I can't do anything right. Another way to identify and understand your filter is, do you often feel like you are the one who is wronged in an interaction?
sometimes you feel that people are trying to take advantage of you, or have you take care of them because you feel that that's your role, or you don't deserve any better from them. So it's these thoughts and feelings. It's understanding this filter that will help you understand how you're reacting and allowing people to treat you. Without it, it's the end result, the filtered information that has a role in, obviously doesn't completely cause, but has a role in symptoms of anxiety and depression, because you are reacting to that inner speech, that system of the mind that has filtered the information, and now you are experiencing the feelings related to that. So it is important to know what is real and what has been filtered information. Now, although this seems pretty clear cut, I think, it is not the be all end all. Of course, so many other factors go into symptoms of anxiety and depression. So, societal issues, so many other things go into this, but this is kind of just a place to start. Let's move to the next. One important piece that I have also found in working with my clients is that once individuals start to really have an understanding of their filter and how their filter is working, they start to label their filter as bad. Usually, I don't think most people say that their filter is good, but usually that their filter is bad. And they feel shame about it, or they're embarrassed about it, or they are afraid of it, that they actually have this way of filtering information. They feel very alone, that perhaps they are the only one who is experiencing themselves as a victim all the time. And so instead of actually working with it and dealing with it, they end up ignoring it. Because it's safer. It's too scary and too uncomfortable to actually get in the muck of it all and really work through the filter. So one thing that I would say about that is the need to just understand your filter is it just is, not to judge it. There's a reason that you created this filter. It was to protect you when whatever experience you had was going on. So allowing that filter to be what it is, and accept the things that are there that you aren't too comfortable with, that you don't like about yourself, and decide to change it, to make a difference. Once you are able to do that, and you know what your filter is, then you have to gather evidence to support or refute what your filter is telling you. You might want to ask your partner or the other person involved in it, what was their intention behind what they said or their behavior? Does it match with what you heard or what you felt as a result of what they said? Does your interpretation, does your secondary match your primary? Sometimes it does, but more often it doesn't. You might want to talk to your support system, engage what their responses might be to the same thing, see how they would have reacted. Not that they are the end all be all in this situation, but people that you trust and really respect would give you the answer as, yeah, I would be really upset in that situation too. Basically saying to you, you have the right to be upset in that situation. Is your filter suggesting you should let something go that is very upsetting to you? Oftentimes I will find with my clients that they know that something's not quite right, but their filter is telling them that, well, you are usually wrong. This other person is usually right. So you should go with them. You should follow what they're saying. The idea that there's a small part of you that's thinking, something's not right here, something is going on, is a warning sign, and one that should be listened to. Now, you could be wrong, but at least you have done some research to see if what you're thinking and feeling is accurate or not. And finally, sometimes our filter will tell us that we are the one that needs to change. So if we're hearing criticism or anger or something from a partner or a friend, sometimes our filter says, yeah, you really are awful. You really, really need to work on that. But the reality might be that it's really not about you. It's really about the other person, or it's about the fit between the two of you. Sometimes your puzzle pieces just don't fit. So it really takes a lot of work to understand what your filter is, not to judge your filter, and then to make some decisions about the outcome of the information that you've processed and what actually is going on. So once you have understood your filter, you can then make, like I said, you can make decisions about your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors. It changes, the way that you now interact with others. So for example, if you and your partner are used to you acquiescing and giving in and agreeing that your partner is right, and all of a sudden you look at your filter and say, I seem to be taking in this information as though I'm never right, that I never have a say in things, that I don't have, my feelings aren't valid, then if you start changing that, your partner or friend might start having a reaction to that. This is not the person that I have signed up to be in a relationship with. And that is part of the fear, is that the dynamic will change, and now what? And you really have to now learn how to coexist together with this new filter or this new framework. And sometimes, that's really difficult to do just one-on-one. And that's where, a therapist or just an objective third party is good to contact, so that you can have someone in the room who's aware of the primary and secondary and aware of how changing your filter changes the dynamic between the two of you. So that is the information that I have. Again, I apologize for the technological issues, but I would love to take questions, and any comments that you have. It would be wonderful.
Great. Amy, thank you so much. I'm just going to join here now that we're in this together, and we'll just take questions at this point. So thank you, everyone who has joined us today. And please, we encourage everybody to send in their questions. We'll get started with one that I wrote down. So Amy, how do you recommend we get the courage to speak up? How do you recommend we, go about deciding which battles to pick with maybe a partner or a colleague? Yeah. Which ones are the most important ones to speak up against?
That's a really good question. And I think that brings up a good point, in the sense that, yes, not everything that is triggering you or upsetting you is worth basically commenting on or talking about. But I think if there's something that continually bothers you or upsets you, and it really just continues to feel like you're not being yourself, or you're not being authentic, or it's weighing on you, then that really is the opportunity to check in with someone. You'd like to think that everyone is open to that kind of conversation. It doesn't always happen, but that's why the idea of involving an objective third party is often beneficial, because they can kind of see what is going on in the room right in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think we had some other questions from the audience that came through as well that I'll read off, and we'll take one at a time. Okay. The first one from Veronica. Once we are aware of our filters, how do we take a step back to recognize it and react differently? Is that reaction then any less true to ourselves, she asks.
Ooh, that is so good. So I don't, I'm not exactly sure if you mean the reaction that you have that's filtered. Is that any less true to yourself? No, it is a reaction that is a part of yourself, but it may not be the reaction the feeling that you need or want at this time. Our filters change all the time. And so if you are using more of your filter from your past, while that was true to you at some point, it may not be anymore. And so that's why it's important to take a step back and be mindful and thoughtful about how you're reacting to things. Do you see you reacting to these things often? Do people tell you that you're difficult, to work with? Or do your friends observe your interactions with people and say, you really should speak up for yourself? I think when it becomes a pattern and starts to really impact your daily living, that's when it's important to try and get the courage to do something about it. And again, an objective third party is always a really good place to start.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And another question that came through from Alexander, when you discussed primary and secondary thoughts, you mainly talked about when one person interprets something differently than what was actually said. Can you speak to situations where what was said was also highly subject to secondary thoughts? For example, the speaker did not say what they meant, so there are secondary thoughts on both sides.
Yes, exactly. There are secondary thoughts on both sides. So that's a really good point. So when I gave you the example of the housewife, what secondary stuff or what filter was going on for the husband that he felt the need that every time he came home he needed to criticize his wife? Maybe things weren't going well for him at work, maybe he was feeling run down. So absolutely, he had his own secondary stuff that was playing a role in the interaction. So that's again, having someone else there to be able to discover what the secondary issues or what the filter is between the two people is really important.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. And I will say too, as we continue to answer folks' questions, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send those through in the chat tab. We definitely want to make sure that we clarify as much as we can because Amy is an expert in this. And so moving to Marlena's question, she's asking, do you think our social media digital monologues have affected how we interact in person?
Oh, for sure. There's a joke about for Halloween, I'm going to go as my Facebook persona. And I think that that's true. We have a tendency on social media to only show what we think others want to see. People don't want to see that we're struggling or, that things are hard or that we're, struggling with our kids or struggling with a partner. So social media has certainly had a huge impact. And you notice it in adolescents too, because adolescents see, all these celebrities or even their friends and giving them messages of you aren't good enough, that you're not out every weekend partying, or you don't look like me. So yes, social media has had a huge impact on this, for sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sure how it'll continue into the future, reflect in relationships.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Aja is writing in, how do you see this translate in customer service or client relationships? For example, servers, account managers, et cetera, where there's less freedom to speak up and address relationship issues.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Well, in a perfect world, there would be some sort of, and this is what I would love to do maybe in my next life, but to consult to businesses and talk about how much of an impact these secondary issues have on productivity, on the bottom line. They really get in the way of people being able to be productive. If you're not feeling comfortable with the people you're working with or with a client, or you're being, verbally abused by a client, you're not going to be able to perform at your best. So to be able to take a step back and say, I'd like to be able to help you. However, the way that you're interacting with me right now is keeping me from being able to do my job. And I know that sounds a little corny or what have you, but it really speaks to what is going on in the moment and allows you to express yourself on the service end of the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how you phrase that conversation to handle that with a client.
Absolutely.
It's so delicate because of the nature of the relationship, but still could help both parties. No, that's really helpful. Our next question that came through, do you recommend reaching out to a couple counselor alone if your partner is not agreeing to go with you, or how would you work through that challenge?
I actually have done, believe it or not, some couples counseling with an individual, because for whatever reason, one partner or another can't attend. And I do still think it's very helpful because it allows at least the one partner to get a sense of their role in the dynamic, their role in the relationship, so that they can do their own work on their own filter, and then either the partner is open to the changes that are going on for the individual, or the partner saying, what is going on? How come things are changing between us? And then that's an opportunity for the individual who's been going to counseling to say, come with me to my counseling, and we can talk about this.
Yeah, that's really helpful. We have so many questions that have been coming through. So thank you, everybody, for sending in your thoughts. Lisa's question, I'm sure we're all dealing with similar things with certain people in relationships, but what is the response to someone who wants to be accepted just the way they are and they have no interest in changing? They just want us to accept them.
That is a really good thought. I think then as an individual, you have to make a decision based on what it is that you want, what this relationship provides for you. If the upside is upper, then the downside is down, as my dad says, then you have now made a conscious choice to say, okay, I will accept this part of you or these parts of you, because the parts of you that matter the most to me are so good, and that I will, compromise on that. And relationships are about compromise. So there is trying to find that balance of what will you tolerate, what is okay with you, and going from there. And you have to really be honest with yourself in that regard as well.
Yeah, that's really important to remember, that compromise back and forth, and what matters to you. And another question that has come through by EC, how do you go about circling back with your partner or friend after you've been mindful and figured out your filter? How do you revisit the conversation to either make amends or get what you need from that person?
I think that goes back to the idea of courage and being able to go to your friend and say, here is what I have figured out for me. And it's working together to, again, find that compromise, that your friend hears you and sees that you are experiencing the interaction this way. And hopefully the relationship is strong enough that you can actually really talk about it and work through it and say, for example, I once had an experience with a friend, so this is more personal than work related, where I was given two choices of things to do. And one option was only for one day. And the other option with this friend, I could do anytime. So I called this friend and said, hey, can we reschedule? I didn't say why. Can we reschedule for another time? Because I was basically being selfish and I wanted to do both. And so later it turned out that my friend knew the first thing that I was doing, what I had changed our plans for to go to the other thing. And she was really hurt by that. And I had to take a step back and say, oh my gosh, that was not my intention. My intention was basically selfish, and that I wanted to be able to do everything. But it wasn't choosing it. I wasn't choosing one over the other, or the experience with you wasn't less than the other one. I just wanted both. And we were really able to have a good conversation about how she had interpreted what I did and what my intention was. Not that my intention was right, but it wasn't personal. And I think that made a big difference for her to know that what I did was more about me than it was about her.
Yeah, that's a really helpful example to kind of think
Yeah.
through, definitely. And Eleanor is asking a question, another work-related question.
Okay.
If your manager and a colleague are involved in mutual collaborative dialogue that seems undermining and causes constant negative stress to you, then how or who do you approach when not being heard or accepted by those individuals? So those work conflicts, potentially.
Yeah, if your manager and a colleague. I guess I would probably have to just know a little bit more about who's not feeling heard. Because right now it sounds like, at least from your question, that it's the manager and the colleague, and so you're probably getting the fallout, I would guess, from the manager and the colleague. So the options might be talking to whoever's above the manager, if you have a good relationship with them, or a peer of the manager, to try and get an understanding of what's happened, or have a consultant come in. Really is probably an outside consultant come in to kind of navigate what is going on between the two of them.
Yeah, the third party seems
Yeah,
to really be helpful.
And it has to be an objective third party, because otherwise, then it's 2 against 1, and it further muddies the waters.
Yes, and those work situations can be really tricky with the office politics potentially as well, and so lots of things to consider in context, but very interesting things to consider. Charlene is asking a specific question around how she's surrounded by people who talk to her a lot. What kind of filter would make me allow people to talk to me nonstop, literally for hours, and maybe some advice or tips for her to handle that?
Well, that is a really good example of teaching people how to treat you. It might come a time where you need to turn to these people and say, I know what you're saying is really important or really funny, or you want to share it, but I need to get my work done, or I'm really enjoying my book. That's why I never tell people on an airplane what I do, because if I made that mistake once, and then they basically spent the entire time telling me their life story, and you don't want to be rude, of course, but at the same time, you do need to say to them, this isn't okay. This consistent talking to me and distracting me from doing either what I need to do or what I want to do isn't okay. And you do say it in a kind way, and an encouraging way. And if you don't mind listening to them, say maybe we can catch up at lunch, or maybe we can, and you can dedicate that time to it. But by not saying anything, you're basically, like that quote says, you're basically telling the individual, what you're doing is working, keep doing it.
Yeah, speaking up in the moment, and different tips like that are really helpful. And Marlena is writing in with another situation. When we are concerned about our own processing speeds, sometimes it's after the fact, the moment that we determine there was a hurt feeling.
Yes.
Sometimes the other party gets frustrated we didn't bring it up sooner, and when it happened, making us further defensive and frustrated with our own feelings and understandings for not happening at the right time. Staying in the moment of the primary situation when it's not a recurring pattern. How do we better position ourselves for healthy relationships when we know it takes us longer to assess a situation?
That's an excellent question. I will encourage my couples to, when there isn't any conflict going on, to say to the other, look, it takes me a while to think about these situations. It takes me a while to process them, and I can't respond right away. I need to think about it. So what I'm going to take some time. I'm going to, go think about it. And then could we come back to this and discuss it? And, that's that compromise that you really need to be able to find, because you're right. Not everybody in the moment can think of the perfect thing to say or be aware of. And oftentimes we're not aware of how we are filtering this information. And we need the time to be able to take a step back and say, I don't want to engage in this because I'm not sure I'm engaging in this conversation accurately. I'm not sure this is a fair representation of what's going on. And again, I totally get that it's easier said than done, but the more you practice it and the more you do it when it's not a conflictual time, the better it will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. And we have so many great questions that have been coming through, which is awesome. We're probably going to take one more question before getting into closing notes. And I want to hit one of our work-related, career-related questions to finish on. Michael wrote in, applying these concepts to leadership or management, how can you best strike a balance between being sensitive to your employees' filters and also protecting your own, given the implied difference in status?
I think what it comes down to is you can certainly say to your employees, I hear what you're saying, I understand where you're coming from, but ultimately, if you are the one responsible for the work product, that you have to make a decision on what you think is best. And there might be reactions to that as well, and feelings and what have you. But I really do find that as long as people feel like they're being heard, that someone is listening to their concerns and their feelings and validating them, oftentimes, even if the choice is made, is different than what they would like or what they would like to see happen, it's easier to digest because they feel at least their information was taken in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. And so many great perspectives and tips shared today, Amy. We really appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure.
Of course. And I'd love to give you a minute or two if you have any other closing notes to leave folks with today, knowing some of the questions that came up or any other advice you may have that folks from the call can really take advantage of today.
Sure. This was kind of just a brief overview of what goes on. When I was coming up with this presentation, I really struggled with the idea that, this is obvious. I was afraid that, my secondary stuff, I was afraid that audience members would be like, duh, like, really? She prepared all of this to tell me this. But I really have come to the conclusion in the work that I've done that people know it, but they're not conscious of it. They don't think about it. And the more we can get people to think about why they are reacting and doing and saying the things that they are, the better off a lot of relationships will be, because we interact with others and communicate with others using this filter. And so it's important to be aware of what this filter is telling us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Amy, thank you so much for all the great tips today.
Thanks, it was fun.
Of course, thank you to everyone else for joining us and for sending in such great questions. As we mentioned earlier, this is the first webinar of our third annual Northwestern Women's Week. So we'll have another presentation tomorrow, and I'll send the link out to you all with the recording of today's presentation. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us at naawebinars@northwestern.edu. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and go Cats.
Thank you. Bye.